Hi, this is Lili de Hoyos Anderson, and you're listening to Choosing Glory. Thank you for joining me today as we cover the week of the curriculum for Doctrine and Covenants, sections 81 to 83. Recently, as I said, since I've covered this material before, which would be available on any of the audio-only podcasts like Google or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it's not available on video because I didn't start recording video until last year. So if you are interested in listening to what I said 4 years ago about these sections, it'd be a little bit of a different treatment and not going back and listening to them, so I can't tell you how much overlap there is. But I am trying to touch rather lightly on these so that we can discuss some other things in a little bit more depth. Let me first thank my Patreon subscribers. I'm grateful to all the listeners. I am very especially grateful for you who have subscribed on Patreon. It is making this possible, and I'm very grateful for the blessing that has been, and I hope that this is helpful. It has been a blessing for me to have something meaningful to do since I've lost Chris, because with energy levels having dropped so precipitously last year as I've struggled with some health issues, there isn't a lot else that I've been doing. So it has been a mercy for me to do something that I hope is helping in a small way to build the kingdom. Really grateful for that. And very grateful to all of you who tune in to listen. My audio editor, Doug, is still recovering from shoulder surgery. He's just barely going to start physical rehabilitation and physical therapy. So, he's doing hero's work as he continues to edit for me. So if anything, I'm going to try to keep this a little briefer just to give Doug a little bit of a break. We'll see if I can make this a little more concise than normal. And one additional thanks to all of you who have been praying for me and I know have put me on temple rolls around the world, and where I've been in your thoughts and prayers, brothers and sisters. I know that has made a difference, and I'm extremely grateful for your kindness and generosity. I cannot fully express gratitude for all the kindnesses that have been shown to me by you podcast listeners, and frankly others as well, my neighbors and friends and my own wonderful children and grandchildren. I do want to tell you that I hope to greet you in person, maybe not on this side of the veil, although maybe that will happen for some of us, but on the other side of the veil, I will look forward to expressing my thanks in person for all the kindnesses, some that absolutely take my breath away. All of them touch me deeply. I'm not trying to measure them by any means. They all show an incredible generosity and kindness given to me. And I will forever be grateful for your goodness and tender things that have come my way because of that goodness. I'm going to stop there before I moved to tears again, as I often am. These sections take place around March and almost to the end of April 1832. So we talked a little bit about the setting of this last time. Again, these are difficult times. I don't know that the prophet Joseph ever had much of a respite from the time that he walked out of the grove. He was subject to persecution. We mentioned that he and Sidney were taken from their homes and tarred and feathered and beaten. At this time, his family is struggling, as we mentioned last week. One of the Murdoch twins that were adopted by Joseph and Emma after they had lost their own twins that were biologically born to them. One of the Murdoch twins, the young boy who was about 10 months old, died. He and his twin sister had measles, but it is recorded that part of the reason for his death, at least, was exposure to the cold night air that happened when Joseph was taken from their home to be tarred and feathered. So the tribulations just continue. Of course, we've also talked about how people who were intense about their conversions to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, to the Book of Mormon, sadly turned against the prophet again and again, left the faith, sometimes even criticizing him publicly or publishing attacks against the prophet that continued to stoke the flames of persecution. So again, he's being challenged. And with Joseph, Emma is going through all of that, of course, as his wife and partner. But, he's subject to so much antagonism and, physical danger because of some of these people who have joined the church and then immediately turn against it. They're also trying to organize the church in two different locations that are 900 miles apart. They're still centering the organization or the leadership of the church in Ohio, but as commanded by the Lord, they have started to send some people to try to develop the land of Missouri, where it has been revealed that Zion will be established in the last days. So that's quite a distance. And Joseph, during this period of time that these sections are received, is instructed to go back to Missouri. So even though they have just recently lost their little son, Joseph does a 900-mile journey with some companions that takes him about 3 weeks. I didn't see detail on how much they stopped along the way, but, it was not as easy or swift to travel in those days. So a lot is happening, concurrently or subsequently, one thing on top of another, it seems, with all kinds of difficulty. And it does just make me so appreciative of the faith and commitment of the prophet Joseph. He was certainly tempered in the furnace of affliction, and he remained a servant of the Lord. I may have mentioned this before, but not too long ago, Harper and I were talking about Joseph Smith again, and Harper said that he said, "I can't wait for the day when the prophet is fully exonerated, when everyone will know who Joseph Smith was and is, and all the attacks against him will be silenced forever, and he will be given the honor and the credit and the appreciation that he so richly deserves." Now, I think we can extend that to look at what's happening in our day as well, because we have many people inside the church who are criticizing our leaders right and left, and social media makes that so much more public than ever before. And this seems to happen every time a straightforward and less popular doctrine is taught from the pulpit by our leaders. It could be in general conference. It could be when they speak in other places. Of course, we talked, I think was it last week or the week before, about Jeffrey Holland's address at BYU called The Second Half of the Second Century, and how he got hammered for that online because a lot of people took issue with his inspired messages that were, in my sincerest belief, delivered with love and the intent to bless people if they could only have ears to hear. So anyway, it's not over. And this is certainly something that's been prophesied again and again by the Lord. And we have been warned that persecution comes when we are steadfast and true to our covenants and willing to share unapologetically the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thankfully, there are many ears that are listening out there and accepting the gospel as well, but there's always the other response as well. I do want to briefly mention something that Bishop Doug Peterson, formerly a bishop of a YSA ward, back at a time where he sent some of his ward to me clinically, and so we had some collaboration back then, and Bishop Peterson has occasionally shared some great information from his studies or awareness with me, and something he sent recently was a video done on Quick Media by Greg Mattson, where he interviewed one of the guys that's on Ward Radio. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, but it wasn't the guy named Carden. It was another guy that's on there. And he explained how some of the people on Ward Radio have started a new way to find investigators for missionaries that is not run by the church, but by these church members who have invested their own resources and now are inviting other people to donate if they would like. And they are a charitable organization of 501c3. Is that how we say it? And so that makes them a charitable donation if we contribute. I believe it's called gatherisrael.org. I'll have to check that. I'm sorry I didn't make notes for that, but I was delighted to see that they have some pretty amazing results already as they're going into areas where they're not even missionaries yet, often in Africa or other sort of far-flung parts of the globe. And they are just saying that they discovered how inexpensive it is to play social media ads in the third world. So a little goes a long way as opposed to the United States, although I think they've done some in the United States too, and they recently talked about somebody in New York who had been baptized. But they are offering information about coming to Christ or having more of God in your life or more peace or stronger families. Anyway, the same kinds of things that we see in ads run by the church. And then they connect them with the church website or something that allows them to request a free Book of Mormon to be placed in their homes by a missionary. And they're getting messages from missionaries who are thanking them for finding these people who are interested in hearing more. And their idea is that if we can help with the finding of people who are receptive, then that frees up the missionary to use their time more specifically to teach and testify, which is something that is better done in person. And that utilizes that missionary's time in the field more effectively than if they're knocking doors or whatever the equivalent may be in their assigned areas to try to get contacts and investigators. So anyway, I was delighted to hear that. Thank you, Bishop Peterson, for sharing that with me. And if you're interested, check it out. I think it's gatherisrael.org. And they were kind of surprised that that URL wasn't taken already by the church, but it has worked out for them. It sounds like a great work. And I think they mentioned that from one, I'm going to forget, was it, anyway, it was something like $300 got them 150 contacts. And that's a pretty amazing return to get. And as I said, many of them are progressing toward baptism, and they've been receiving pictures of these people who are being baptized into the church because of their initial contact through this initiative that is member-driven. So anyway, the work is moving forward in some marvelous ways, and the Lord is inspiring some great works, and I would invite you to check that out. I hope I didn't get too much of the information or the details wrong. I'll try to check those and verify next week. Okay, we're going to go back to this time of the church where it's just beginning, but yes, missionary work was happening. And of course, they didn't have all the facilities and the tech and the ease of travel and things like that that we have these days. So it was a more laborious situation, but they were getting a lot of converts who are coming from the East, typically the Eastern United States. This is before we had big convert groups from Europe, particularly England, but they're coming from the East and they're trying to settle in Ohio. And so not only is all of this other stuff going on with the persecution, continued translation of the New Testament, Emma and Joseph losing a child, the tarring and feathering, and, anyway, all these things trying to get Missouri kind of going in the independence area, but also we have going on, they're trying to establish an economic order that will take care of some of these people who are joining the church who come with very few resources. And as we studied in section 42, the economic order of the Lord, meaning the law of consecration, was received and given, to Joseph Smith through Revelation. So on top of everything else, they're trying to provide the implementation of that for the membership of the church to help those who come without resources and those who do have resources to share that and allow people to take care of themselves. Now, the church is not wealthy during this time, so there's much need and a lot of effort to try to meet those needs in the way that the Lord has established. And this is a new way, so they're learning as they go. And we have here in these relatively short sections this week some additional information about, how things are to be handled in the law of consecration. So anyway, I hope you get the feeling that this is just a rapid fire restoration. It's happening at sort of breathtaking speed. And people are coming and people are leaving. We have another instance of that here in section 81, where, as it's noted in the heading, this is the establishment of the presidency of the high priesthood, which is the Melchizedek priesthood. Basically, it's the first presidency that is being established, and the Lord is, again, line upon line, precept upon precept, restoring the organization of his church in the latter days. So this is the beginning of this council of the first presidency in a formal way. So Joseph Smith is, of course, the president, and he has two counselors, Sidney Rigdon, and the first other member of the first presidency is Jesse Gauss. Now, Jesse Gauss, as noted in the heading, was one of those flash-in-the-pan members. He's baptized sometime after October of 1830, and by the end of 1832, he's excommunicated. So, that's a couple of years. And he's hot enough and committed enough at first that he is selected to be one of Joseph Smith's counselors in the first presidency. And then within 9 months, he's excommunicated. Now, Jesse Gauss's story, to be fairly brief about this, is that he was raised as a Quaker, and he did live a Quaker life with his first wife, who had 4 children and then passed away. He married again, and I think they had at least a daughter. I didn't see too many details on whether or not they had other children in this second marriage for Jesse Gauss, but he and his wife, after having a child, joined a Shaker community. And maybe you remember that we've talked about the Shakers before. And as a quick refresher, they don't believe in sexual relations, even between a husband and a wife. They believe in strict celibacy. So even after they're married and they have at least a daughter, the Gausses join the Shaker community and agree to total sexual abstinence, which would explain why the Shakers are dying out. They've had a few converts over the years, but they really don't have many members anymore. I don't know what the current number is, but it's pretty low. They were known for having some nice artisan crafts and woodworking and other things, but that's basically, the legacy of the Shakers because they don't reproduce. You may remember that they thought the Savior had already come in the form of a woman. So, there were some big departures from the gospel, or their form of apostasy was sort of unusual. At any rate, after being in the Shaker community for a while, Jesse Gauss leaves. His wife would not come with him to join the Church of Jesus Christ. She stayed with the Shakers. And that was kind of the end of this second marriage. After a while of being in our church, he went back and tried again to persuade her to come with him, but apparently they had even a bit of a disagreement about custody of that daughter, so they didn't really part on friendly terms. Anyway, Jesse Gauss did end up leaving the church. It is suggested that one of the reasons he may have been called in the first place is that he and Sidney Rigdon had both participated in communal societies, meaning, something akin to trying to live the way the early Christian church lived, which was a kind of law of consecration or united order effort. And because of their experience in that kind of community, that perhaps they were seen as useful in leadership to try to help establish the united order in this time. So anyway, he was another, moment of blowing hot in his faith and then blowing cold and leaving rather rapidly. He was replaced in this position in the first presidency by Frederick G. Williams, who remained faithful. Okay, that's what's going on in section 81. And section 83, let's skip for a minute to section 83, the last short section of this group this week. And this is more information again about the law of consecration with specific instructions to take care of widows and orphans. And it does talk about how women, this is verse 2, have claim on their husbands for their maintenance until their husbands are taken. And verse 4, all children have claim upon their parents for their maintenance until they are of age. And the end of this entire section, at the end of verse 6, widows and orphans shall be provided for, as also the poor. Amen. I don't really like the word widow anymore. I mean, I never had a problem with it before, but it's a painful word. And yet, it is said here with the love of the Lord, because we become more dependent on our neighbors and friends and, family first, of course. But when they aren't available or close, we are dependent on our neighbors and our friends to help with things that used to be willingly contributed by our husbands. I'm so grateful that I have Chris as my partner who was always willing to take care of so many temporal concerns. I'm grateful that he took on, as so many good men do, all good men, frankly, let's just say that, all good men take on their support of their families. And I know I didn't always understand how great a gift that was. Thankfully, it was fairly early in our marriage that I had kind of an epiphany about that. And I realized how much of a leap of faith that it is. And I didn't experience it, so I'm not trying to say I know exactly what it feels like. But I became more sensitive and aware to what a great act of faith it is for a man to take on a wife and children, especially in the wonderful circumstance where it's possible for a woman to stay home full-time with her children. I know that's not always possible. This is not a judgment or condemnation about the variety of circumstances that we encounter in life. We have to adapt to a variety of seasons of life and different things that are required of us. But nevertheless, I will be forever grateful for my husband's willingness to do this. And as I said, the willingness of my sons and my sons-in-laws and so many good men out there who are willing to start from scratch and often finishing education or training of some kind so that they can have the wherewithal to provide for a growing family. And I've heard from other women over the many years of life that some men are not willing to have additional children because they're thinking down the road and thinking this is just too much to commit to financially. And I know there are other reasons why families are necessarily limited, but I think kind of with awe about how willing Chris was to provide for 8 children with the expectation that I was a full-time mom forever. And I'm just so grateful for that. I mean, he put the money in the bank and basically I took it out. And not in a careless way, I'm happy to say, and certainly I, consulted with Chris about any big expenditure, but that was the system. I mean, he worked full-time and extra, often with a part-time practice when we were, trying to recover from, some extra expenses. So he was busier than I wished him to be, or busier than he would have preferred to be, but he was willing to do whatever it took for us to continue to have those children. And he didn't ever shrink from the claim that the Lord allows women and children to have on their husbands and fathers. God bless all good men. I am certainly grateful and have been a direct recipient of the courage and the faith of a good man. And I know there are many of you out there, or many of you who are married to a good man like that. And I hope that we express our appreciation liberally. Let's talk about section 82, which is, full of some nice gems. There are really quite a few little things here that we could talk more about than we will today, but let's just take a moment. Of course, verse 3, for of him unto whom much is given, much is required. I remember for years thinking that that expression was, where much is given, much is expected. And then, anyway, at some point I actually checked the text many years ago and saw that it was like, oh no, it's not just expected, it's required. So some of you have asked, and I've tried to address this in various ways, but how are people in the church judged as opposed to people outside the church and whatever? And the answer is here. Of course, it's sort of a sliding scale or, grading on the curve, however you want to call that. Yeah, it's different. I mean, God has talked forever about how the heathen nations will be redeemed. And that seems to indicate to me that there is some latitude granted for people who have grown up with false traditions and not had as much exposure to light. So yes, does that put a lot of responsibility on those of us who have been given the gospel all our lives or early in our lives? Yeah, it does. God understands where we may have been, members of the church, but not necessarily taught well or taught completely and all of that. God can take all of it into consideration. So let us just rest on the trust that God is completely just and completely merciful. Mercy will not rob justice, but there will be justice. Nobody is going to feel robbed in the end. There's not going to be any one of us that's sitting in a corner after final judgment saying, I need a recount. That's just not going to happen because it will be perfect. It will be just, and it will feel just to all of us, and it will feel merciful. We will see the effects of mercy come into play after justice is satisfied. So, yes, it is grading on the curve, so to speak. But where people have not been taught, they will be given that opportunity during the millennium or the spirit world or whatever. Anyway, we know that there will still be the need for the exercise of agency to choose what level of light people want to ultimately receive. So again, it's not like anybody gets a free pass, but all situations will be taken into consideration. And I just keep coming back to this. We really hopefully can increase our trust in the Lord and not suffer about things that are not completely taken care of here. In fact, much will not be figured out here. Again, that statement from Preach My Gospel, everything that is unjust in this life will be made just. Or is it unfair, perhaps? Unfair in this life will be made fair through the atonement of Jesus Christ. Like, it's not over. So let us trust God that it will all resonate with a way that will help us understand it. It's going to be so much better than we think it could possibly be. We have a mention here of the adversary, and I am going to read a little bit of verse 5 here. Watch, for the adversary spreadeth his dominions, and darkness reigneth. Always a reminder to not dismiss the fact that we do live in a sphere of life where the adversary is with his followers, and they have as their goal the misery and destruction of each of us. So let's not fall for the moral relativism that tells us, oh, it's all good, everything's the same, there's nothing really evil. That's just a perception. That's not true. There is good and there is evil. We have an advocate in Jesus Christ. We have an adversary in Satan. They are not equally powerful, and yet we do know that right now the power of Christ has not been fully manifest. It is available to us, but we have to choose it and seek it, and yes, have faith in the timing of the Lord until that moment where evil is completely banished. During the millennium, and then again, one big battle at the end to fully vanquish Satan and his followers, and that will happen. Now, that final wrapping up will occur in the future, but in many respects, in the most important ways, Christ has already won the victory. His atoning sacrifice, including his death and his resurrection, have won the victory. Those things are done. There is no way that Satan can prevail. Christ has won the victory. The question is, how much of that victory do we want to participate in? How much will we receive and engage in that we might be willing to accept the invitations that God has so generously extended to all of us? That's the question. Verse 7 is important. Halfway through, verse 7, unto that soul who sinneth shall the former sins return. That's really important too, brothers and sisters. I know some people have expressed to me over the years that they think that that sounds kind of harsh and punitive. It's not. It's descriptive of the reality. And what I mean by that is that too often it's almost as if people can be fooled into thinking that this mortal experience is like a point system where you get positive, points for doing good things, service, callings, a mission, whatever. But you get demerits or, negative credit demerits if you sin or make mistakes or whatever. That's not how it goes. It's not just something that, okay, points on the right side, points on the left, and then they tally it up. And if you end up in the positive column, you're okay. It's not a point system. It's a matter of becoming. Like, can we truly conform to the image of Christ? And if we think of it in terms of just, I'm making up for my sins by making more charitable contributions or volunteering over here or, trying to be a good neighbor, that's not how it works. It's not about points. It's about who have we become. President Oakes gave a really great speech about that once where he does say this is not about some celestial bank account with deposits and withdrawals. It's about who we become. So let us realize that that's what this verse is telling us, that if we, for instance, were liars for a period of time, and then we repented and we were honest for maybe even a few years or a lot of years, and then we start lying again, well, we're still liars. We might have taken a break from lying, but we're still liars. The same would be true of any sin or rebellion or evil behavior. This is the sad truth of what was happening to many of these, or at least a sad proportion of these early saints and early converts. And it happens throughout the millennia. People can recognize the truth and come wholeheartedly to the truth and make sacrifices for the kingdom of God, and then completely turn away. So who are they? It's not because, well, they did so much good during the time that they were members of the church that outweighs all the stuff that they returned to. No, and that's why God uses phrases like it's like a dog returning to his vomit, which is pretty graphic and unpleasant, but it really becomes that. If we're still willing to go back to those behaviors, then that's still part of who we are. And until we keep, coming to Christ and make that our priority and let ourselves be changed, and as we've talked about so many times, committed to the path of sanctification and continue to seek the cleansing, the purifying power of the Holy Ghost, meaning we're born of the Spirit in a way that does completely purify us and make us worthy of the presence and prepared for the presence of the Savior. If we're on that path, then we will receive the end of that destination. I don't think, again, the Lord ever wants us to be afraid of the requirements. I don't think he wants us to be OCD or perfectionistic or over-scrupulous or anxious, but I do think we have to be diligent. He says that again and again, and we're going to get one of these, again, sort of sobering, but super crystal clear statements in section 82. This is so often quoted, brothers and sisters. I know you're familiar with it. 82:10. I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say, but when you do not what I say, you have no promise. Well, that's all meaning the same thing, right? There are conditions. It doesn't mean the Lord is limited in his resources. He could provide all of it for all of us if we would choose to receive it. So his arms are extended all the day long, and he invites all and denies none. We are the only ones who limit what we are able to receive in what the Lord is offering because of our unwillingness to obey. And obedience, like I said, human progress being what it is, it's up and down. We have times where we stumble and fall, but do we get back up with not perfection, but diligence? And we again choose to put our hand to the plow and learn and become a little bit better, a better version of ourselves, more committed, more able, more capable of doing the will of the Lord, more embracing of his ways. And then the perfection will come when it is supposed to, as an endowment, because, as we've said before, not because we're perfect, but because the Lord is perfect. And because we have chosen him, it allows him to choose us. I'm just going to end this section with something that I've been, plinking around the piano with. As I've mentioned, there are some returning signs of life in my energy, and I am incredibly grateful. They are small steps, and it's up and down. I still have days where I don't function much, but thankfully, on days that I do, I'm doing a little more than I used to do. I'm so grateful for that. Here, the trick is now to manage my expectations because I got used to having like zero expectations of productivity, and it was necessary for, sadly, a very long time, but now I have to keep tempering my expectations because, you start to feel a little better and then you want to do all these things that you have been putting off or delaying or having to avoid. And anyway, I'm taking it pretty easy. Don't let me deceive you. It's not like I'm trying to set any records. I'm not. But it has been interesting to see that, a few steps forward and a few steps back. But there's some forward motion. One of them is that I have sat down at my piano again and been able to enjoy playing some of the hymns, again, in my imperfect but loving way, because I do love the hymns of the Restoration. So I was playing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, hymn number 60. Such a beautiful hymn, and maybe inspired by our recent celebration of Independence Day in the United States of America. The Tabernacle Choir, Tab Choir at Temple Square now, has the version they sing is stunning. It's an arrangement by Wilhowsky, and it's my favorite arrangement of this incredible song. And that came out of the Civil War time, right? And I was privileged enough to be asked to be the choir conductor for a chapel dedication in Las Vegas in our ward. And it was I think there was it 2 or 3 wards that were going to be able to use that chapel. So it was a combined choir, and we filled the choir seats. Let me tell you, we had some incredible voices there. It was my privilege to conduct the numbers that we did as a choir. I think we did 3. But this was my favorite, and I got to choose this one. The stake president chose one, and then I think we did a third. But this one, boy, they did a great job. I had this wonderful friend, Janice, who was at the organ, and we had someone at the piano as well, and we had flutes for this one. They wouldn't let us do trumpets, even muted trumpets, which would have been fun, but Janice thought about doing flutes, which did still have a military sound to it, kind of fife and drum type sound. Oh my goodness. It was so beautiful. And the choir was just extraordinary. A great privilege. Honestly, a musical highlight of my life. And it has always been a great privilege to conduct choirs. I did one here in Utah in our ward that was phenomenal. So anyway, I'm grateful for anybody who ever sang with me. Such a privilege. We loved every word of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The second verse really has stood out to me. And along the lines of the victory being won, let me just read the words of the second verse of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And this, you don't have to be American to appreciate this. We just have to think about Christ's victory and look at these wonderful words. He is sounding forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. Oh my gosh. Does that just thrill you like it thrills me? Like, that gives me chills. He is sounding forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. Oh my gosh. These words are so beautiful. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. In other words, the battle might be raging, but the war has been won. Christ will never retreat. He has claimed the victory, bought with his precious blood, with the best blood that ever lived on the earth. The victory's won. Now it's us that are before the judgment seat. Will we receive the victory? Will we embrace it and participate in it as his grateful and humble saints? Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Brothers and sisters, glory, glory, hallelujah. We are so privileged to have the fullness of the gospel in this dispensation. May we ever be grateful. May we ever be faithful. And always and forever, I am grateful for my incredible husband and partner, Chris Anderson, and Doug Larson, who I hope is healing fast and well, of Point Digital. Take care.